I'm truly thrilled to have on Dr. Issam Eido today, Assistant Professor of the Practice of Religious Studies at Vanderbilt University, and a true expert in the field of Hadith and Islamic law. I've been following Dr. Eido for some time now. I've attended his lectures and heard his talks, and I'm confident that the audience today will derive considerable benefit from the lecture. As many of you know, this episode is a part of a series that seeks to educate the audience on necessary skills for doing research in Islamic studies. And again, I'm just so fortunate to have the doctor on to lead a session on how to find and use Hadith. So welcome, Doctor.
Thank you, Ashar, for having me on this podcast. And it's my honor to be with you with this important topic, and maybe also considered a hot topic in our modern day for both maybe Muslim society and Western scholarship.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you again for being on. And I don't want to take too much of our time, but before we do start, I wanted to ask if you just tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm right now at Vanderbilt University as an assistant professor of practice of religious studies, and also I'm director of undergraduate studies for the department that's religious studies, Islamic studies, and Arabic studies. Before that, I was a visiting professor at University of Chicago Divinity School for 2 years. And before that, I spent 1 year in Berlin working with Angelika Neubert in the history of Quran and Quranic manuscripts. This mostly around 9 years spent in the Western societies, countries, academic institutions. Before that, I was a lecturer at Damascus University in the College of Sharia, teaching their Hadith and Quran. So I got my PhD from Damascus University on Islamic Studies and Hadith. So yeah, so it seems like my life split between two worlds, the Muslim world and then Western world. And during this journey, I got to know maybe two different methods of learning and teaching, the traditional one and academic one, both in Western world and also Eastern world. And I think this a privilege I got during my life. Yeah, so now I'm here in Tennessee. It's a very beautiful place, calm place, and spend my time teaching and research, as I'm teaching at Vanderbilt, considered as a research university. And I think that's everything.
So thank you again for that. We can go ahead and get started. So can you give us a brief introduction to Hadith and its writings and its usefulness for Muslims and Western researchers?
Yeah, that's really a very important question, especially when think about Hadith, mostly like people right now in academia, especially here in Western academia, focusing on Quranic studies, the history of Quran more than Hadith. We see some like people here and there like focusing on Hadith, but the Hadith itself, that traditionally considered as a second source for the Sharia and legislation. So Hadith can clarify, restrict the meaning of the Quran, change the meaning of the Quran, maybe add some rulings or modify some rulings. And Hadith considered maybe the largest library in the history of Islam, is a very huge library in comparison with other disciplines like in Quranic studies or other genres, usul al-fiqh. And if we consider all sub-genres in Hadith studies, kutub al-rijal, kutub al-hadith, kutub al-jarh wa al-ta'dil, al-ilal, al-su'alat, and all of these, maybe we'll talk about this later. But Hadith considered the second source of for Sharia traditionally. And it's very important when we speak about hadith, we need to notice and observe two main periods. The first one, consider like what we call a pre-canonical period, and then with canonical periods. So pre-canonical periods, that mean like before the third Islamic century. This is the first and second Islamic century. During these centuries, mostly hadith is not fixed as we can see it in the third Islamic century. So in that early period, the first and second Islamic century, mostly hadith is a combination of the statement of Prophet, the statement of his companions, and also the statement coming from the successors, al-Nabi, al-Sahaba, and al-Tabi'een. So when you open any book, any source from that period, you will see all of these together in one book. But then after that, maybe I'll talk about this later also. With canonical books, there is a request, a demand for the hadith, just like coming from Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's his statement, his practice, and his approvals. It's like قوله وفعله وتقريره. So mostly there, we can see that obviously in the 6 canonical books, as we will talk later about these 6 canonical books. So we'll see the demand on the hadith coming from Prophet, and this technically called al-hadith al-marfu', so like elevated or raised to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So
Doctor, sorry to interrupt, but you said qawl, fi'l, and taqreer. Do you mind telling us what that is?
Right. So qawl and fi'l and taqreer is a major agreement between all scholars of Islam. But however, I need also to add also al-wasf, al-khalqi wal-khuluqi, but let me reiterate that again. Al-qawl, the statement of Prophet, and the al-fa'l, the practice of the Prophet, and then taqreer, approval or disapproval of the Prophet, and then wasf. Al-wasf is just like giving some traits and like characteristics of the Prophet in terms of his physical and spiritual, ethical, and manner sides. So however, this like 5 aspects, qawl, fi'l, taqreer, wasf khalqi, and khuluqi, this agreed upon among the people of hadith, Ahl al-Hadith or al-Muhaddithin. But for the people who are just like focusing on legislation and Sharia and the fiqh, so they narrow these 5 to 3, just like the first 3, al-qawl, the statement, al-fa'al, practice, and al-taqreer, the approval. So however, in the second Islamic century also, we have a very rich source on hadith coming especially from Hanafi school and Mu'tazilite school. So mostly when we study hadith, people think about hadith starting from the 6 canonical books and the 3rd century and everything coming from the people of hadith, the Ahl al-Hadith. But if we just like focus on the evolution and the origin of the hadith, so the 2nd century was the first point of this genre. And the 2nd century witnessed very rich literatures on hadith coming from specifically from Hanafi figures and also Mu'tazilite figures. And specifically here, I want to maybe to mention the circles of Abu Hanifa, that's Muhammad bin Hassan al-Shaybani, specifically his book Al-Athar and Kitab al-Hujjah, and also Abu Yusuf al-Athar. And then the 2nd generation of that circle, Isa bin Aban, and also from Mu'tazila, even though Dirar bin Amr not described or depicted as a pure Mu'tazili, but however, some Mu'tazilite tabaqat considered him a Mu'tazili, and he wrote a very important book, At-Tahrish, So this book may be considered as a book open the discussion on the hadith and the contradiction of the hadith and the corpus of the hadith, how we can find contradiction in that corpus, and also the liquid text. So then not fixed meaning. And he raised a very important point in that time. So like he described Muslim community divided into many groups, and each group use a hadith to support their stance. So however, hadith linguistically mean something like new, like jadid. And I think this linguistic meaning, just like used in some texts we can see, is just like versus Quran, as Quran is an old, or like nas qadim, old text, or maybe as we know this like in Kalam debate on the creation of Quran, and the majority we know that said Al-Quran was not created, that means is qadim. So then hadith here is the opposite of qadim. But however, the term hadith becoming a technical term maybe in the second Islamic century and so on, just targeting the statements coming from Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's mean this the hadith here coming from Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That mean that not just like nothing new here, but just like statement, and this is a technical term, just like the speech of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And maybe it would be good if we notice or maybe raise this point. In the second century, I think we can notice that there is a very important word used instead of hadith. The word is al-ilm, the knowledge, or I don't know how we can translate that in this context. So like uktubul ilm or daya'ul ilm, and this like mostly meant as hadith here. It's not just like knowledge. So I think we need to notice that, and this reiterated in the statement of Malik bin Anas and also Az-Zuhri and other figures in the second Islamic century. They used al-ilm instead of hadith. So however, on the writing of the hadith, we know this a very important debate on the permissibility, was writing the hadith permissible or impermissible. So the majority provided us with many texts, many evidences that hadith was not permissible to write hadith. This theoretical, but a practical level, I think many texts provided us with evidences that hadith written in the time of Prophet, and also in the time of Sahaba and the time of Tabi'in. In the time of Prophet, there is a hadith that Prophet said to his circle, to his Sahaba, write down something to Abi Shah. And Abu Shah is just like a figure came to the Prophet in the time of opening Mecca and asked him to write something like from his words, and then Prophet asked his community to write down something. And we know that there is Sahifa of Ali bin Abi Talib, something like written, is very brief. And also Abu Huraira himself described his fellow Abdullah bin Amr bin As. He said that Abdullah bin Amr bin As used to write down the statement of Prophet, but Abu Huraira did not do that. So however, all of these evidences, we don't have any like material evidence for that. But in the first century and in the beginning of the second century, we have two important collections called Sahifa. The first one, Sahifat Hammam bin Munabbih, and the second one, Sahifat Suhail bin Abi Salih, an Abihi, an Abi Huraira. This Sahifat Hammam bin Munabbih is an isnad, a very brief isnad with just like two figures, and Suhail bin Abi Salih, also Suhail bin Abi Salih, and through his dad, his father, and then through Abu Huraira. these both Sahifa edited by two contemporary scholars. The first one, Mustafa Al-Azami, who worked on Suhail bin Abi Saleh, and also Rifat Fawzi Abdul Muttalib, who worked on Sahifat Hammam bin Munabbih. So however, Al-Azami and also another contemporary scholar, Nabia Aboud, in 1967, provided us with different and multiple evidences on the early writing of the Hadith. And this is just like to encounter the Orientalist viewpoint on writing of the Hadith and dating Hadith. So they considered in the eyes of Orientalism as like a radical approach on writing Hadith. So in the 2nd century, yes, so there are many sources before the 3rd century. The 3rd century considers a golden age of narration. The 2nd century noticed and witnessed multiple resources, and all of these resources right now edited and available in our library. Maybe the most important resources coming from Hanafi circle, Kitab al-Athar, Kitab al-Hujjah, Musnad Abi Hanifa, even though compiled later, and also the writing of Dirar bin Amr, Musannaf Abdul Razzaq al-San'ani, Musnad al-Shafi'i, and Muwatta Malik, all of these coming from the 2nd century. And I mentioned earlier Sahifat Hammam bin Munabbih and Sahifat Suhail bin Abi Saleh. So however, so we can witness in the first 3 centuries, this I consider the formative period, 3 main stages. The first one, the oral tradition and the genre of Suhuf. This mostly in the 1st century. And the 2nd century, we witness multiple genres called as Muwatta or Musnad or Abwab or Musannafat, where we find both marfu' and mawquf or maqtu'. That means, so the statement of Prophet, the statement of Sahaba, companions, and the statement of Tabi'een, the successors. And the 3rd stage can be called Sihah and Sunan. It's like a Sahihain and the 4 Sunan. Mostly the focus of these books on as-sunnah al-marfu'a, the statements coming from Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is like 3 main stages in the formative period. And this mostly related to the first, your first main question on the writing of the Hadith. The sub-question is very important about the benefit of the Hadith for both Western and Muslim scholars. We know that the civilization of Islam consider the civilization of the text, and I think the major and main and the large text in the history of Islam is Hadith. So Hadith is the source of all agreement and disagreement. So especially if you go to like early collection like Musannaf Abdul Razzaq, you can see in one chapter all statements that support your viewpoint and support the viewpoint of your maybe your khasam, your rival. So we know that practically that Quran does not answer all the questions that raised after the death of Prophet. So Hadith used as a main source to answer all of these questions. So then Hadith became as a most important resource on all of these disagreements. But then the conflict started on the authority of the Hadith and the originality of the Hadith. So these 2 questions, very important questions in both Western academia and Islamic scholarship, again, the originality and the authority. So however, internal discourse among Muslim society and Muslim scholarship in the formative period, maybe 2 major or 2 main viewpoints can be witnessed here. The first one that considered hadith as a lived tradition. So let us say al-hadith al-hayy. And this hadith hayy or lived tradition in the 2nd century, this is the position of Mu'tazilite and Hanafi scholar. So what does that mean? So when they approve any hadith, that means this hadith applicable. So there is a connection between the soundness of the hadith and the application. So there is no disconnection between these two important sides or aspects. So, but for the traditional viewpoint, this like Ahl al-Hadith, there is a view that becoming more clear in later period that there's no connection between the soundness and the application. And this we witness that in Muwatta Malik when he saying many times this hadith sahih, that means this hadith is sound, but walaysa alayhi al-amal. So it's not applicable. We cannot act upon this hadith. And that's, I think, a very important point we need to witness in the history of Islam, and especially in the formative period. And that make us feel comfortable with many hadiths, like considered sahih, considered sound, but still not applicable. So this a completely a different position of what we have in our modern time, and especially what we call like Salafi approach toward hadith, because the Salafi approach toward hadith is just like to combine these two aspects, the soundness and applicable. So that means application. So if the hadith is sound, then this hadith applicable. This hadith should be implemented. And vice versa. If this hadith is not sound, is weak, then should be out of the application or implementation. So this, I think it would be good just like to share this screen. I worked on this, this project for 2 years, and I presented maybe some lectures here and there on the Hanafi approach and Mu'tazili approach of the Hadith. So this screen just like to show how the Hanafi, the early Hanafi approach Hadith in the time before canonical books. So they put different tools to criticize Hadith and to minimize this corpus, and to sift hadith based on different tools. And these all tools can be considered non-isnad tools. One of them established sunnah, the sunnah thabita, and Quran, this al-kitab الذي لا يحتمل المعاني, unequivocal Quranic text. And also they used umum al-balwa, general afflictions, as a tool to criticize hadith. That means if the hadith narrated and related to general afflictions, public affairs, so this hadith should have this hadith should have an authority, or should be narrated by mass, not just like by a single narrator. And also praxis is a very important tool for Hanafi schools. That means if the hadith narrated, but the action contradicts the reports. The action of the first generation, so contradicts the reports. This assigns this hadith is shaz, anomalous. And the third one is reasoning. This mujibat, ahkam al-aql, necessary rational conclusion. So, however, all of these non-isnad tools not agreed upon among Hanafi circles. We can see different tools. But these tools agreed upon, we can see it in Kitab al-Hujjah of Muhammad bin Hassan al-Shaybani, and then Ibn Aban, and then Al-Jassas. Here is a chart when we can see an agreement and disagreement among Hanafi scholars. So we see this like here, al-Shaybani and Ibn Aban, Al-Jassas, all of them agreed upon 5 non-isnad tools. But like if we take Al-Karhi here, so Al-Karhi is another important figure in the history of Hanafi school. So agreed just with 2 tools, with just like he, it seems like for him, unequivocal Quranic text and established Sunnah are 2 tools to criticize and sift hadith. And this another chart describing the Mu'tazilite approach, Mu'tazilite criteria on hadith. We can see here different figures from Al-Khayyat, the teacher of Al-Balkhi, and then Al-Jubba'i, Al-Qadi Abdul Jabbar Jubba'i, but some of them from the school of Baghdad, some of them the school of Basra. I'm saying that just like for any the audience who are aware about the schools of Mu'tazila in the early period. So all of them agreed upon, maybe we can see this like 4 tools: Quran, Sunnah, consensus, and reasoning, aql. So all of these tools used to in their writing to criticize hadith. So however, all of these tools among Hanafi and among Mu'tazili used in the early sources, in the 3rd century, it seems like Muslim community attempted to find another way to criticize hadith. And I think they found their way in Isnad. And then with the rise of the 6 canonical books, we can see the authority of Isnad substitute the authority of these non-Isnad tools. With the passing of the time, so Isnad becoming more powerful than these non-Isnad tools. So then we can witness in the Hanafi circles later, so some Hanafi figures maybe disagree Hanafi position based on the Isnad, because this hadith may be narrated in Bukhari and in Muslim and then accepted widely. And then it seems necessary for some Hanafi scholars to follow the majority, to follow the authority of Isnad over the authority of these non-5 Isnad tools. And that's witnessed very clearly in the, maybe I can mention one figure in the Hanafi circle, especially Al-Imam Abdul Hayy al-Laknawi. It's very clearly for him to raise the authority of Isnad over these non-5 Isnad tools. I hope this answer cover many things related to your question. Just let me know if there is any comment or anything unclear. Happy to go over it.
Thank you, Doctor. It was pretty thorough. I did want to ask before we move on, and this will relate to the organizational principles of the various types of texts that we have. What's the difference between a hadith, akhbar, and athar, and is there a difference between these terms?
Yeah, right. So this it's not coming from the later textbook or later sources. We can witness that in the writing of Muhammad bin Hassan al-Shaybani. Sometimes said al-athar, sometimes hadith, sometimes khabar. So, however, it seems al-athar used in the early period as any statement coming from Prophet, from his companions or successors. It seems like a wider technical term used for all statements coming from all of these generations. Hadith becoming very maybe clear to use, just like refer to the statement of Prophet, and khabar also is sometimes used as hadith, sometimes used as khabar. I'm talking here on the early period. In the later period, so we can witness khabar also used in the literature of history. So that means al-akhbar al-tarikhiyya, historical reports. So that means anything we can witness in Sirat ibn Hisham, Maghazi al-Waqidi, and Tarikh Baghdad. All of these, like the narrations there, reports there, like considered as akhbar. So then al-akhbar as a wider umbrella used for the statement of Prophet and any statement, any historical statement. But sometimes also, especially in the book of Muhaddith scholars, al-khabar used as just like as hadith, the statement from Prophet. So however, so like just like overall hadith specifically used for the statement coming from the Prophet, And athar statement include Prophet, his companions and successors, and khabar used for all of these, and also historical reports.
Understood. Thank you so much. And just before we get to, again, the various types of collections and how they're organized, I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about the, if you could show us a hadith and tell us a bit about the anatomy of the hadith. What's a sanad? What's a matan? What's the difference between akhbarana and haddathana? What's a kitab? What's a bab in terms of the organization of the text? And if you could tell us a bit about the common abbreviations in hadith works, that'd be pretty useful. Thank you so much.
Right. This, yes, an important question for anyone, and consider anyone in the audience may be aware or not aware, but just like to highlight all of these. So let us take an example from Sahih al-Bukhari. So this an example, maybe we can use this example later, maybe with some other questions. If maybe if you have on the how we can do takhrij, how we know the grading of the hadith. So here in this hadith, we can see 4 lines, 3 lines and a half. The hadith could be less or could be more, could be pages, could be maybe 1 line. But however, we have 2 main parts of this hadith. The first part considered or depicted as isnad, and isnad started from the first word till the last word here and before the statement. So if we read the isnad together, that حدثنا موسى بن إسماعيل قال حدثنا داود بن أبي الفرات قال حدثنا عبد الله بن بريدة عن يحيى بن يعمر عن عائشة زوج النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قالت سألت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عن الطاعون فأخبرني. So the isnad or the sanad, this like 2 terms are similar, so can end here or end here. So then maybe we will go back again to that one, especially when we look for a hadith or search for a hadith, how we can find the hadith. So in this sanad, we have two things to notice. The first one is the name of narrators, and that's very clear here: Musa bin Ismail, Dawood bin Abi al-Furat, Abdullah bin Burayda, Yahya bin Ya'mar, Aisha. So sometimes these names mentioned like generously the name of the narrator and his dad, or maybe sometimes his grandfather, and maybe the second name could be his grandfather. We need to know how we navigate that in the literature of narrators, Kutub al-Rijal. However, sometimes the narrator just like mentioned as just like one name because it's very famous, or maybe we don't know his dad name or his family name. And then the second part of this is now the tools of narration. So this like the siyagh, like what's the expressions of narration. So you can see here حدثنا, and here حدثنا, and then عن. And sometimes we can see أخبرنا instead of حدثنا. So حدثنا or أخبرنا for al-Bukhari himself, no difference between these two. So حدثنا just like literally means like he narrated to us, and أخبرنا he told us, he informed us. So it used to like the disagreement in the history of Islam on the difference between حدثنا and أخبرنا, but in the end the majority agreed about there is no distinction or difference between these two words. But also the majority agreed about there is a difference between حدثنا, أخبرنا, and عن, because حدثنا is a very clear form of meeting and direct speech between the source and his student. But an is not clear if the meeting happened or not. That's why in Al-Bukhari, sometimes if the narrator who used an he narrated immediately from the one mentioned here or not narrated immediately from him, just like his way of his narration. So we call this tadlis. Tadlis, that means sometimes maybe say an Aisha, but he exactly narrated through someone and then through Aisha. So we see that Al-Bukhari, with this type of narrators, al-mudallisin, the people who doing that. So sometimes Al-Bukhari reiterates the hadith in the same place or maybe a different place to and find an evidence this narrator used haddathana. And haddathana here becoming a very clear evidence that there is a connection, there is a direct connection between this narrator and his source. So this sanad, so sometimes with sanad we can see, maybe not here, but I can explain it. So we can see the letter ha. So the letter ha, that means there are two isnad from Al-Bukhari till the letter ha, and then after ha, the sanad merged and with the same sanad. So before ha, that means two sanad, and then with ha, and after ha, we can see one sanad include these two branches of isnad. So however, when read hadith, we use to say tahwil instead of ha. So some people said ha, some people say tahwil. So that means there is merge here in this isnad. So this in terms of sanad, and sometimes in some books, just like for abbreviation, instead of haddathana, we can see just thana, excluding the first two letters, and instead of akhbarana, just we see na and exclude akhbara. So when we see na, that means we need to say akhbarana. When we see thana, that means we say haddathana. And we can see in the previous hadith, haddathani and haddathana, they are same, but Al-Bukhari is just like following the same wording that narrated to him in both isnad. So in Matin here, we can see two lines. فأخبرني أنه عذاب يبعثه الله على من يشاء من عباده وأن الله سبحانه جعله رحمة للمؤمنين ليس من أحد يقع الطاعون فيمكث في بلده صابرا محتسبا يعلم أنه لا يصيبه إلا ما كتب الله له إلا كان له مثل أجر شهيد. So this statement coming from Prophet, nothing coming from Al-Bukhari or another narrator, as we can see here the brackets, and just focusing on the hadith, the statement from the Prophet. If anything added, maybe we'll add it later with citing maybe the narrator or the one who is saying that. And this considered idraj just like that mean inserted statement or a statement inserted by some narrators or by the author Al-Bukhari or maybe the Sahabi himself. So this maybe is the main maybe terminology on the hadith, sanad, matan, and the haddathana, akhbarana, and also what we call an, and the technical term here, al-an'ana. However, so especially in Al-Bukhari, we can witness some hadith without isnad, just like qala. I don't know if we can see here any thing like that. So let us go. Mostly this used after the tarjama. Let me see. Still, yeah, okay, here Babu Qawlillahi Azza wa Jal, and here we see Waqala Mujahid. So Al-Bukhari cite this statement without isnad. This considered in the hadith nomenclature, Mustalah al-Hadith, as ta'liq. So that means hang out this statement on the narrator without isnad, without chain of narrators. So ta'liq mostly used in Sahih al-Bukhari just like to give more evidence, to give support to the school of Bukhari, the viewpoint of al-Bukhari. So these hadiths should not be considered like from Sahih, is not like from the criteria of Sahih. So when people like criticize Sahih al-Bukhari, they need to focus on the hadith with isnad. But any hadith without isnad is just like al-Bukhari used this statement just like to support his viewpoint, but not to say this hadith sahih or not sahih. Sometimes we can see the ta'liq in Sahih al-Bukhari with isnad. So when we see it as isnad, that means this following his criteria. So this ta'liq, and also we can see here bab, this the technical term used for that is tarjama. So tarjama literally means like translation, but tarjama here is the title of the hadith here. And this title under kitab. So kitab is the umbrella for all of these abwab chapters. So here kitab al-anbiya is a chapter on prophets. And then we have here sub-chapter bab hadith al-ghar, is like talking about the prophet and the incident of al-ghar. So I think that's everything related to the technical terms we can witness in the hadith and anatomy of the hadith.
So thank you for that, Doctor. Do you mind telling us some of these main hadith collections, something about their authors and where they fall in these genres? And not to make the question too elaborate and too large, but just more generally, how are these organized? How is a musannaf work organized differently from another work?
Right. So however, there are different stages for hadith genre. So mostly, let us say we have maybe 5 main genres or 5 stages. Maybe some add or maybe change or modify, but this is like what I see 5 genres or 5 stages. The first stage we witness in the 2nd century, and this maybe 4 genres emerged in the 2nd Islamic century. These 4 types of collections. The first one called al-abwab, and the second one al-muwatta'at, the third one al-musannafat, and the fourth one al-masanid. So al-abwab may be the first genre written in the history of the hadith. It's just like writing down a hadith related to a same topic. So let us say the topic on divorce. So then the muhaddith scholar just like collect all the hadiths related to divorce and put them under one treatise. So like bab fi talaq or bab fi raf' al-yadayn, so raising hand in prayer. So, and this very important genre, because in this bab we can witness what's included and this included and not included in that bab is very important for analysis, historical analysis, and the history of fiqh and the history of hadith. So, however, many abwab or many collections under bab are lost, but with finding and the working on manuscripts in our modern times, so we witness like sometimes these types of genre emerged and maybe revived in some places in the world. So, however, al-abwab is the first genre written in the history of hadith. Maybe the second genre, al-musannafat. Al-musannafat is a collection of hadith, athar. That means a statement of prophets, a statement of his sahaba, the statement of his tabi'een, as we can witness in Musannaf Abdul Razzaq San'ani and other musannafat. And this may be in the 2nd century and in the late of the 2nd century. This musannafat based on the order of topics, not based on the order of narrators. So when we open Musannaf Abdul Razzaq San'ani, we can see the order of chapters based on the order of fiqh. So that means Kitab al-Salah, Kitab al-Tahara, Kitab al-Sawm, and so on. Another genre very similar to Musannafat, al-Muwatta, and the 2nd century witnessed different books under Muwatta, but the famous one coming from Al-Imam Malik bin Anas, who compiled Al-Muwatta, and Muwatta narrated from his students. So then we have different Muwatta'at based on the narrations of his students. The most famous one of Muwatta, the Muwatta al-Laythi, Yahya bin Yahya al-Laythi, a student of Imam Malik bin Anas, and this became maybe the canonical Muwatta used in Muslim library. Another Muwatta coming from Muhammad bin Hassan al-Shaybani, a student of Abu Hanifa. So we can witness and compare these Muwatta'at in terms of Islamic school, in terms of madhab, in terms of historical evidence, and in terms of geographical maybe differences. And the third one, Al-Masanid. Al-Masanid is many scholars in the 2nd century and 3rd century and later on, so collect hadith based on Musnad. And Musnad is a collection based on the name of narrator. And the narrator here is Sahabi. So that means the order of the book based on the narrations of Sahaba. So that means, and mostly ordered alphabetically. So that means the hadith coming from Khalid is cited before the hadith coming from Abdul Rahman, is based on the alphabetical order. So alif, ba, ta, tha. And mostly these masanid, but the masanid of Sahaba, male companions, and then female companions. So they put like 2 major sections, male and then female. And some masanid may be very rare. They give an order different from alphabetical orders, like based on the merits of Sahaba and some virtues, like Sahaba who became Muslim earlier, Sahaba who attended all maybe Ghazawat, or Sahaba who attended Fath Mecca. So, but however, Masanid based on the names of Sahaba, and this based on ordered, based on alphabetical order. This is mostly what we can witness in the 2nd century. In the 3rd century, 2 genres emerged. The first one, Jami' and Sahih, and the second one is Sunan. So Sunan, we witness that there are 4 main collections considered as Sunan: Sunan Nasa'i, Sunan Ibn Majah, Sunan At-Tirmidhi, Sunan Abi Dawood, and also other Sunans considered canonical or for some, and maybe non-canonical for others, like Sunan Ad-Darimi, and other Sunan in the 3rd Islamic century. The Sunan based on the order of topics, and these topics based on the fiqh topics. That means starting with Tahara, then Salah, Sawm, Zakah, Hajj, and so on. The second genre in the 3rd Islamic century, Al-Jami' or Al-Sahih. So Al-Sahih or Al-Jami' is a wider than Sunan, because include not just the topics related to fiqh, also the topic related to religion. So this is like a wide concept of religion, like talking about the revelation, talking about prophet, talking about tafsir, talking about the fitan or the trials or manaqib, merits and virtues, and ethics, manners. So this is like the Abwab al-Din, all chapters related to the religion, not just related to fiqh. And here fiqh is the ruling, as we know. And this is what we witness in the 3rd century. The 4th century is another genre, and maybe with that, the main collections of hadith sealed with this genre called Al-Ma'ajim. Al-Ma'ajim in the 4th century, mostly coming from some specific authors like At-Tabarani, who compiled 3 معاجم الكبير, the large, and الأوسط, the middle one, and الصغير. So معاجم same as musnad. So the order of معاجم based on the narrators. But Al-Tabarani offered us with two types of orders. The first one, Al-Mu'jam al-Kabir, this based on the order of Sahaba. So the Hadith put in the order based on Sahaba, and alphabetically, he narrated around 60,000 Hadith. And that's Al-Mu'jam al-Kabir. And then Al-Mu'jam al-Awsat and Al-Mu'jam al-Saghir, the middle and the small one, he but a different order based on his shuyukh, not based on Sahaba. So in Al-Mu'jam al-Awsat, there are around 30,000 hadith with 2,000 shaykh, and then Al-Mu'jam al-Saghir, 1,000 shaykh with 1,000 hadith. So he narrated one hadith from each shaykh. So then Al-Mu'jam al-Awsat wal-Mu'jam al-Saghir based on the his shuyukh order, and Mu'jam al-Kabir based on Sahaba order. So then in the first 4 centuries, we can witness different genres: al-Muwatta'at, al-Abwab, al-Musannafat, al-Masanid, al-Jawami', al-Sihah, al-Sunan, and al-Ma'ajim. So after that, starting in the late of first century and so on, mostly all works focus on these main collections. So like in the late of the 4th century and the 5th century, we can witness the genre called al-Mustadrakat, al-Mustadrakat and al-Mustakhrajat. So al-Mustadrakat, we have an example, Al-Hakim in his Mustadrak ala al-Sahihain. So the idea of al-Mustadrak is just like to trace the criteria followed in Sahih al-Bukhari, and to include other ahadith not included in Sahih al-Bukhari based on the criteria in Sahih al-Bukhari. So that means it's just like following the criteria of Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim and added some ahadith not mentioned in Sahih al-Bukhari. So al-Mustakhrajat, on another hand, that al-Mustakhraj is use the same isnad in Sahih al-Bukhari or Sahih Muslim and other books like Sunan, and maybe let us say al-Bukhari here. Yeah, so let us say حدثنا موسى بن إسماعيل حدثنا داود بن أبي الفرات. So we have in the 4th century Mustakhraj al-Ismaili. So he just working on this hadith. Maybe he has an isnad. He can meet al-Bukhari maybe with his sheikh, or maybe with his, maybe the sheikh of his sheikh. So then Abu Bakr al-Ismaili narrated through someone through one, and then he merged with al-Bukhari with Abdullah bin Buraida or with Yahya bin Ya'mur with less number of narrators. And this, just like Mustakhrajat, the main issue is, the main purpose is to seek isnad ali, that means elevated isnad, like less numbers of narrators. And also with this mustakhrajat, maybe we have different wordings of matin, so that it's very important when we read Sahih al-Bukhari, it's very important to read also mustakhrajat. Maybe we have different wordings and different content can help us in understanding or in interpretation and hermeneutics. So this is what we witnessed in the 4th and 5th Islamic centuries. After that, the third genre is considered like encyclopedic works. So this, like in the 6th and 7th centuries, like Kitab Jami' al-Usul, and then other books like considered as encyclopedia, is just like to collect maybe 2 books or 3 books or 4 books or 6 books. And with that, with this genre, we can witness the canonical of 6 canonical books. So why these 4, like collected in one encyclopedic work, or why these 6? Like for Jami' al-Usul, he collected 6 books, that's Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Sunan al-Tirmidhi, Sunan Abi Dawood, al-Nasa'i, and al-Muwatta. And we know that when we say 6 canonical books, people like say Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, and Sunan al-Arba'a, 4 Sunan, including Ibn Majah, but not al-Muwatta. However, we have a debate in that period of time, like in the 5th, 6th, 7th Islamic centuries. What are the canonical books? Is the 6 that we know already, the 2 Sahihain and 4 Sunan, or 3 Sunans with Muwatta Malik, or maybe 3 Sunan with Sunan ad-Darimi instead of Sunan ibn Majah. So it's like 3 viewpoints on the 6 canonical books maybe in that time. So Jami' al-Usul is a book, is a collection of 6 books, including Al-Muwatta and Ibn Majah, and the order of that book based on the topics of fiqh and the topics, not topics of fiqh, topics of religion. So, but these topics also reordered alphabetically, not based on the fiqhi order. So then if we want to work on a hadith related to at-tahara, you will see it under the letter Ta, not maybe in the first volume, as we can see it in Kutub as-Sunan. This like the 3rd genre, the 4th genre, as-ziyadat, so like additional statements found in different collections. So let us say we have Jami' al-Usul, or we have encyclopedic work, just like collecting maybe 6 books. And maybe later, like what we can see in Majma' al-Zawaid wa Manba' al-Fawaid li Nuruddin al-Haythami, he worked on these, he found, okay, Ibn al-Athir al-Jazari, he compiled Jami' al-Usul and collected 6 canonical books, or 6 books. And then he found maybe it would be a good idea to find what the additional hadith can be traced outside of these 6 books. So then the idea of Majma' al-Zawaid is to trace any additional hadith not mentioned in the 6 books, maybe in other masanid, in other muwatta'at, or maybe in other musannafat. And maybe we'll describe this later when we come. If you have any question maybe on how we do takhrij on hadith, I'll describe this maybe in details. And the 5th genre, I call this at-takhrij. So this genre is just like to work on maybe a book in the history of Islam. Let us maybe take an example, Al-Hidayah lil-Marghinani. So this is like a book on the Hanafi fiqh. And in this book, many ahadith cited and mentioned, but without giving any details on grading or the resources. So later scholars work on this book and work on the hadith mentioned in that book and giving their gradings and their resources. And these books are very important in terms of maybe inclinations, in terms of madhab, in terms of belief, in terms of maybe political inclinations. So like Kitab al-Hidayah received multiple takhrij, one of them like from Hanafi scholars and others from Shafi'i scholars. And then here we can see the power and the authority of madhab on this book. So like when we come to Hanafi scholar who work on takhrij of Kitab al-Hidayah, mostly like giving some preference for the hadith narrated in this book and supporting Hanafi school. And when some like Shafi'i scholar working on al-Hidayah, maybe giving maybe a chance to other mazahib and their evidences. So again, so just like to summarize this way, we have 5 genres in the history of Islam. So that means the body of hadith, the first text of hadith, the main text of hadith, like in Muwatta'at, Abwab, Musannafat, Masanid, Jawami', Sihah, Sunan, Ma'ajib. This compiled in the first 4 Islamic centuries, and then Mustakhrajat, Mustadrakat, the 4th and 5th Islamic centuries, and then encyclopedic works in the 6th, 7th, and 8th centuries, and also later till our modern time. And then ziyadat, additional hadith, is I think start with maybe 8th centuries and so on. And then at-takhrij also started in the maybe 7th and 8th centuries.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. How does one locate a hadith and its grading? And can you just tell us really quickly what you mean when you talk about grading? I know you mentioned it before, but just as you answer, kind of just tell us a bit about what we mean when we talk about grading.
Yeah. Right. So this maybe it's a very important technical term, grading, and mostly we witness that in kutub al-takhrij, this like takhrij linguistically meaning like extracting. It's like for dentists, like finding root canal. So this like for me, it's like takhrij here mostly philological works and finding the source or the root canal of the hadith as like dentist working on some like finding root canal in teeth. So when you find the source of the hadith and like from where this hadith come or the origin of this hadith, mostly you locate this hadith and the source of this hadith, the authority of this hadith. So, and maybe we have different types of takhrij is to say, is this like coming from the Prophet or coming from the Sahabi or coming from the Tabi'i? And maybe this different from like, just like, okay, when we see this hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari, different from Sahih Muslim, from Sunan Tirmidhi or Sunan Ibn Majah. So then the grading of hadith can have different gradings. So the first is just like to locate this hadith is coming from Prophet, from Sahabi and Tabi'i. So this is the source, or maybe just like to figure out this hadith coming from Sahih Muslim, Al-Bukhari, or from Sunan, or from 6 canonical books, or not from 6 canonical books, or maybe from the books written on hadith, not the book written outside of the hadith, like in the tafsir or tarikh, or the book written in maybe Sunni, like Sunni works, not in Shia works. So there are different types of takhrij, and not just like to say this like narrated in Sahih al-Bukhari or Sahih Muslim. This like based on the source takhrij, is just like where this hadith cited. And there is another grading is agreed upon later among traditionalists, like on the how we grade hadith. And this grading evolved over the course of the history of Islam with the 3 main stages. The first stage is just like we call is like two types or two gradings, Sahih or Da'if. This is mostly before at-Tirmidhi. So the grading just like based Sahih and Da'if. And then after that, after at-Tirmidhi and after the statement coming from Al-Khattabi in the 3rd Islamic century, another term added called Al-Hasan. So, and later on, Muhaddis scholars agreed upon 3 ranking or 3 grades of takhrij or giving grading to hadith. That means Sahih, Hasan, and Da'if. And then with Ibn Hajar, in later period, Ibn Hajar died 852, he added 2 sub grades. This is called Sahih li ghayrihi, Hasan li ghayrihi. So then the stages of grading coming from 2, starting from 2, and then 3, and then 5. So however, all of these grading based on the narrators and the grade of narrators. So how we approach each narrator here, and then this very complicated, and also started with 8 grades of narrators, and then becoming 12 with Ibn Hajar. And the scales of that start from a weak narrators to a sound narrators. And between that, there is maybe subgradings. And beyond that, like when we say weak narrators, that it's still like acceptable, but beyond weak narrators, maybe someone who is lying, someone who is fabricating this like outside. And beyond the sound or reliable narrators, there are people like beyond that, like he is most reliable. He is a mountain of like thiqa, reliability. So then like 12 scales. So all of these 12 scales, as we can see in, especially in the works of Ibn Hajar, all of these giving us a background of grading the hadith. So however, overall, so we can say when hadith like considered as sahih, that means this hadith is applicable and does not mean that, as I mentioned earlier, this we should act upon this hadith. So we need to gather all of the hadith and then give a complicated, sophisticated interpretation of these hadiths to find out what we can take from this hadith, single hadith. So however, Sahih and Hasan in later works considered a source for any fiqhi issues, just like giving a source and evidence for rulings. So hadith da'if, mostly among traditionalists, not considered for rulings, but considered for something related to maybe fada'il al-a'mal. That means mostly like doing something like additional sunnah or nafila, or maybe celebrate like one day, or consider this day a celebration for Muslim community. This like fada'il al-a'mal, or maybe to fast more or to do some tatawwa. So these fada'il al-a'mal you can see some evidences in hadith da'if. So these mostly the grading. So this like internal Muslim perspective on the grading. So however, this process of grading, it's not maybe not sound perfect for maybe Western scholarship. So Western scholarship mostly focusing on a different issue, on dating the hadith. It's not grading the hadith. So dating the hadith, just like finding and figuring out from where the hadith come, and who is the author, and maybe who is the narrator, and maybe who is the one who fabricating or making up, who is the one who is saying this hadith. So this mostly the idea on grading. If that's clear, maybe I can move on how we can locate hadith. This, I think it's maybe the main question when you talk to me about the hadith and takhrij. I think that's the irritating question for anyone, like lay people and maybe also for specialized people. So how we can locate hadith, from where we start. So specifically right now with like COVID-19, do we start like from just like some engine search like Google, or like we need to go to some electronic application, or we go to books, or to ask some authority like in our congregation? So from where we start. So maybe there are two approaches here people follow. The first one, like let us say like from up bottom, or like from bottom up approach. So maybe starting from up bottom approach, just like we can start to Google and put any word or anything you search for, and you find maybe sources or some maybe description on the hadith you are searching for. So that's easy, but it's very risky, because we know that now the hadith is used as weapon, mostly in maybe Muslim community, someone finding hadith on Google or maybe in WhatsApp, and just like going to his community and giving an evidence. But then all of these hadiths that we are reading right now, used to be under a complicated and sophisticated examination over the course of the history of Islam. So each hadith touched by, let us say, a long surgical process. And then if you go to Google right now, maybe just like you find few lines about this hadith, and that could be clear or maybe could be right or not right. So it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous to maybe just like to rely on Google and this like starting from up, bottom approach. So, however, I think just I want to highlight the risk, maybe possibilities in this process, just like to go to Google or maybe to WhatsApp and then spread the word among someone's fellows. This hadith is weak, or maybe it's da'if or sahih. But let us work on something like maybe could be educating for all of us, and start from bottom to up. So bottom up approach. So with COVID-19, I witnessed, especially in the first weeks, and I don't know if you agree with me, just feel free to say, yes, I encountered with this issue or not. So the first weeks after COVID-19 hitting the whole world, so Muslim community used to discuss a hadith that it's considered a martyr if you stay in your house. And this is just like to encourage Muslim community to stay in their house and not to leave their house so that the virus not spread. So I witnessed this hadith on WhatsApp in maybe in Muslim communities and Google in many places. And people say, yes, you need to stay in your house. And that's the advice from Prophet. So is that something like you encountered or you heard about the recommendation on staying in one place? Or
I can't say that I had. I can't say that I have, but I'm sure it's there. Yeah.
Right. So now it seems like this not an issue maybe in before our modern time, before the maybe like all borders and all like visa issues and passport and moving very fast and easily between like countries. So it was not an issue in maybe the old time or before the modern state, but with all like this like new issues and new development that we have, it seems it's like a very important issue. And this, I think it would become like, I think it's very important to be aware right now. So each hadith can maybe receive a different process in different times. So maybe some people maybe don't see that in the hadith, maybe in all time, but now it's becoming an issue. So then takhrij and grading and reconsidering or giving a new reading for the hadith is valid in every moment. It's not just like something like happened before and done. So if this is what I encounter when I, let me go to that one. So here from Islam Online, so this hadith Rasul عن الوباء. So hadith Rasul عن الوباء ليس من رجل يقع الطاعون فيمكث في بيته is an article written that time and asking Muslim to stay in their house. فيمكث, you can read here, إنه كان عذابا يبعثه الله على من يشاء فجعله رحمة للمؤمنين فليس من رجل يقع الطاعون فيمكث في بيته صابرا محتسبا يعلم أنه لا يصيبه إلا ما كتب الله له إلا كان له مثل أجر شهيد. So the whole article is just to speak about the importance of staying in your house. So that means Bayt here understood as your house, exactly the physical like house is not like homeland, right? So maybe we can understand Bayt here as a homeland, like your city. But however, the hadith here, like in your house, and because the virus spread in everywhere, so you need to be in your house and not leaving your house. And this way, what I witnessed among many people, if you stay in your house and then just like die because of this ta'un, plague or COVID-19, then you are considered shaheed, martyr. So now when I received that and I said, okay, that's very, it seemed like very, something like someone like talking on the issue here, like specifically like living in our time exactly. So is that exactly the wording of the hadith, or there are something like different? So we can maybe go to Google and just like put that, and maybe we have different results. But I prefer this approach, like bottom up and as a specialized. I think we need to start from maybe one of these approaches to find this hadith. So here we have, from here to here, we have from An Aisha till Ash-Shaheed, we have many tools to find this hadith. Aisha is a tool to find hadith, and then the beginning of the hadith, and maybe the topic of the hadith, or maybe a word in the hadith, or maybe the content of the hadith. These 5 things can help us as a tool to find hadith. So let us start with the first tool, Aisha, al-Mu'mineen. So we have here something can help us finding this hadith. So Aisha, we know that in the later collections in Islam, there is a collection compiled all main hadith textbooks in one collection. I'll start with this important book, and this very important book for Western and Muslim researcher. So the book called تحفة الأشراف في معرفة الأطراف للحجاج المزي. So تحفة الأشراف في معرفة الأطراف للحجاج المزي died 742, and this in this book with 13 volumes, the edition of Bashar Awad, and Al-Mizzi collect 6 canonical books, hadith books, including Ibn Majah, not Al-Muwatta, Imam Malik. So we can see here in this hadith 17685 how I locate this hadith. Tuhfat al-Ashraf, the order of the hadith here based on the order of Sahaba. So then we need to go to the index, and we see that anything under Aisha radiallahu anha, and then we see who is the narrator of Aisha. So I think before that, just like I locate the sanad of this hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari here, as we can see Aisha and Yahya bin Ya'mur, because the Tuhfat al-Ashraf ordered based on Aisha, and then based on Yahya bin Ya'mur, and then based on Abdullah bin Buraida. So if we go again to Tuhfat al-Ashraf, and then this the Fihris of Tuhfat al-Ashraf. So you can see here, right, سألت النبي عن الطاعون. You see Aisha here. So however, in the Fihris of Tuhfat al-Ashraf, you can also the edition of Bashar Awad Ma'ruf. He gave the order of all hadith based on the first sentence of the hadith. The first sentence of the hadith. And this سألت النبي عن الطاعون, and then we can see here Aisha, this volume 11, and the number of hadith. So this is the first way to locate hadith in Tuhfat al-Ashraf. The second way, if you know the narrator who narrated this hadith through Sahabi, then there's another way to narrow your searching to that narrator himself, that Yahya bin Ya'mur. So then we can see here, Yahya bin Ya'mur is the main narrator of Aisha. So let us read here what we can see in Tuhfat al-Ashraf. We have Kha Sin, and that means Kha referring to Al-Bukhari, Sin referring to Al-Nasa'i. Hadith, سألت النبي عن الطاعون فأخبرني إنه عذاب يبعث الله على من يشاء. And then he mentioned Kha في التفسير, and then في الطب, and then في القدر, and mentioning the narrators. He said Musa bin Ismail, and then عن إسحاق عن حبان bin Hilal, and then في القدر عن إسحاق bin Ibrahim عن النضر bin Shumayl. He does not give the whole isnad. And then النسائي في الطب عن العباس bin Muhammad عن يونس bin Muhammad, and another hadith in النسائي عن إبراهيم bin Yunus bin Muhammad عن أبيه. أربعتهم. So do you see here أربعتهم? That means the last one here is Musa bin Ismail, the last one here Habban bin Hilal, and Nadr bin Shumayl, and Yunus bin Muhammad. These four through Dawood bin Abi al-Furat, and then Abdullah bin Buraida, and then Yahya bin Ya'mur bihi. And then he mentioned Kaf. This Kaf because Tuhfat al-Ashraf is a work based on Al-Qasim bin Asakir. So Al-Qasim bin Asakir also provided us with a collection with the same idea. And then Al-Mizzi followed Ibn Asakir and traced any mistakes in Ibn Asakir. So he said, Al-Mizzi here, Hadith seen, يعني النسائي ليس في الرواية ولم يذكره أبو القاسم. That's mean Al-Mizzi here giving us a note that Ibn Asakir just forgot to mention An-Nasa'i here. So when we go to Ibn Asakir, we see just Al-Bukhari. We don't see An-Nasa'i. So that now we know that the hadith mentioned in just Al-Bukhari and An-Nasa'i in 6 canonical books. And then from that, we know that all of these narrators coming through Dawood bin Abi al-Furat. So Dawood bin Abi al-Furat is the common link for that isnad. And from Dawood bin Abi al-Furat, we have a single isnad. This hadith ahad, Abdullah bin Buraida and Yahya bin Ya'mur and Aisha. But after Dawood bin Abi Furat, we can see 4 narrators. And then these 4 narrators narrated in Al-Bukhari wa An-Nasa'i. So this is what we can get from Tuhfat al-Ashraf. If we go to Tuhfat al-Ashraf...
I had a quick question. There are numbers. Those numbers
right.
Going back to.
Right. So here, just like we can see this when we see 4/213, that means the volume and the page in that volume, and then the number of hadith in this collection. However, maybe we can witness different numbering in maybe some collections or some editions. We need to go to the Fihrist or the index of the bibliography of the Tuhfat al-Ashraf and see which edition that used here for Al-Bukhari and Al-Nasa'i to locate that hadith. So this in Tuhfat al-Ashraf. So however, if we need to widen and expand our search, there is another book is very important called Ithaf al-Mahara, بالفوائد المبتكرة من أطراف العشرة, and this by Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, died 852. Before Ithaf al-Mahara, Tuhfat al-Ashraf, in the index of Tuhfat al-Ashraf, when he put Aisha and then Yahya bin Ya'mur, he said like in the index that Yahya bin Ya'mur just narrated 1 hadith in 6 canonical books through Aisha. So that means Yahya bin Ya'mur is someone is just like not famous. It's just like he narrated in all 6 canonical books, just like 1 hadith through Aisha. So if we go to Ithaf al-Mahara and we go to the index, so Ithaf al-Mahara, Ibn Hajar here added 11 books on 6 canonical books. So that means any hadith not mentioned in 6 canonical books and found in these 11 books, Ibn Hajar cited here. And these 11 books, very, very important 11 books. The first one, Sahih ibn Khuzaymah, and then Sahih ibn Hibban, Musnad al-Shafi'i, Muwatta Malik, and Musnad al-Imam Ahmad, مستدرك الحاكم and مستخرج أبي عوانة, منتقى ابن الجارود and سنن الدارقطني and الدارمي. So 11 books. That means with 6 and 11 we have now 17 books to find that hadith. And in the index we can see Yahya ibn Ya'mur narrated 4 hadiths through Aisha in these 11 books. So now Yahya ibn Ya'mur narrated 4 hadiths in 17 books through Aisha. And then if we go to Ithaf al-Mahara here, we will see that. So Yahya ibn Ya'mur here, 587. So let us go to 587. Okay, the hadith here, you see Yahya ibn Ya'mur al-Basri an Aisha. And he just put ha mim. So that means Musnad al-Imam Ahmad. So, okay, we just find this hadith in Musnad Ahmad. So now this hadith mentioned in Bukhari and Sunan al-Nasa'i and then Musnad Ahmad. So now among 17 collections, this hadith found in three collections. حديث أنها سألت رسول الله عن الطاعون قالت فأخبرني أنه كان عذابا يبعث الله على من يشاء وجعله الله رحمة للمؤمنين. الحديث. And then Ahmad, he provided the sanad or أسانيد of Ahmad bin Hanbal عن عبد الصمد ويونس بن محمد وأبي عبد الرحمن المقرئ كلهم عن داود بن أبي فرات عن عبد الله بن بريدة. So that means all of them through Dawood and Furat. So Dawood and Furat still is a common link, and after Dawood and Furat we can see a single isnad, ahad, till Aisha. But Dawood and Furat is the source of that hadith, and we can see here 3 additional. So Abdul Samad, Yunus bin Muhammad, and Abi Abdul Rahman. In Tuhfat al-Atraf, 4 narrators. So now we have 7 narrators narrated this hadith through Dawood bin Abi al-Furat. So now we have a good picture on the isnad of this hadith. So now if we move on to another collection also in the isnad, this a book also written by Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani called Al-Matalib al-Aliyah, and he collected 10 works. And these 10 works, all of them are Masanid. So Musnad Ahmad bin Maniya, bin Abi Shayba, Ishaq bin Rahoya, Abd bin Humayd, Haris bin Abi Usama, Abu Ya'la al-Kabir, al-Humaydi, Abu Dawud al-Tayalisi, Muhammad bin Abi Umar al-Adani, Musaddad bin Musarhad. When we go to al-Matalib al-Aliyah, we don't see that hadith. So if we search on al-Matalib al-Aliyah, al-Matalib al-Aliyah also based on the name of Sahaba. So under Aisha and Yahya bin Ya'mur, there is nothing there. So then now we have 27 collections, and we find this hadith just in 3 collections, Bukhari, and Nasa'i, and Musnad Ahmad. So now we have 3 sources, just like to locate, just like to see where isnad. We have many facts here about the isnad, and these facts can help both the people like who are working in like traditional way or maybe Western scholarship on the dating of isnad, or maybe grading, or maybe finding this hadith, the common link, or the single isnad, khabar ahad, and what's happening here. So now everything here related to isnad, if we like to expand this work, just like to work in Matin, we need to go to Jami' al-Usul. I described this earlier, Jami' al-Usul of Ibn al-Athir al-Jazari. So in Jami' al-Usul, this book, as I said, ordered based on the topics, and the topics ordered based on alphabetical orders. So then if we just like find this hadith, then finding this hadith under, I think في باب الطب, on the medicine, and الطب under the letter Ta. And then under Ta, under الطب, we can see the باب الثالث, الطاعون والوباء والفرار منه. So here in this chapter, Ibn al-Athir narrated multiple ahadith related to ta'un. And he put here kha, he did not put sin, and that means he followed the mistake of Ibn Asakir. And that's a mistake in Jami' al-Usul, because this hadith mentioned in al-Bukhari and al-Nasa'i. And al-Nasa'i, one of the 6 canonical books compiled in Jami' al-Usul. And you see here, we have the number of the hadith in Jami' al-Usul. Al-Bukhari, Aisha, just the narrator, does not give any isnad. So the interest here, the focus is not isnad, is the matan. سألت رسول الله عن الطاعون يكون في بلد يكون فيه فيمكث, and أخرجه البخاري. And then Ibn al-Athir giving some linguistic clarification on some maybe words in the matan. However, Ibn al-Athir also, if the hadith narrated in like found in different collections, he gives us here details like in another riwayah, in another narration, there is a different wording of that matan. So as we can see in the following one, like ha, ma, mim, ta, ta, and wa fi hadithi, right? And he giving us like different wa fi riwayah, right? So the benefit of Jami' al-Usul right now is to give us a wider picture of the matan. And right now, so far, we don't see anything different. So all of these, like Ithaf al-Mahara, right? So here there is no matan, just like working on isnad, Tuhfat al-Ashraf, nothing, okay? We just like finding this hadith, same isnad. There are different wordings, as I will explain later. But in all of these, so mostly same method. However, all of these, Al-Bukhari, Al-Nasa'i, especially Al-Bukhari and Nasa'i, we can see in different of فَيُقِيمُ or فَيَمْكُثُ فِي بَيْتِهِ, we see فَيَمْكُثُ فِي بَلَدِهِ. Is not staying in his house, staying in his country. So Al-Bukhari and Nasa'i but فَيَمْكُثُ فِي بَلَدِهِ. So now, from where فَيَمْكُثُ فِي بَيْتِهِ? We go to Musnad al-Imam Ahmad, because this is what we can see in Ithaf al-Mahara. So in Musnad al-Imam Ahmad, so Abdul Samad, just Abdul Samad, narrated through Dawood bin Abi Furat, فَيَمْكُثُ فِي بَيْتِهِ. So again, so in al-Bukhari and al-Nasa'i, all of these 4 narrated through Dawood bin Abi Furat, he said فَيَمْكُثُ فِي بَلَدِهِ. He stayed in his country. But in Ithaf al-Mahara, when we go to Ahmad bin Hanbal, Musnad, we see that through Abdul Samad, he said, فَيَمْكُثُ فِي بَيْتِهِ. So now we have 6 narrators narrated through Dawood bin Abi Furat, فَيَمْكُثُ فِي بَلَدِهِ, and Abdul Samad narrated through Dawood bin Furat, فَيَمْكُثُ فِي بَيْتِهِ. So this Jami' al-Usul. If also we want to expand our research, we go to Majma' al-Zawaid. Majma' al-Zawaid added 6 books on the 6 canonical books, and these 3 Ma'ajim of al-Tabarani and 3 Masanid. This Musnad Ahmad bin Hanbal, Musnad al-Bazzar, and Musnad Abi Ya'la. So right now we have around all of these around maybe 35 collections. And in Majma' al-Zawaid, we don't find this hadith. So however, so far, in Majma' al-Zawaid, Jami' al-Usul, Ithaf al-Mahara, Tuhfat al-Ashraf, al-Matalib al-Aliyah, these all may be collecting 35 collections. And in all of them, we find the hadith in just like 3 collections, Al-Bukhari, Al-Nasa'i, and Al-Bukhari, Al-Nasa'i, and Musnad al-Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal. So now we work on the narrator, Aisha. We work on the content, the topic that's in Jami' al-Usul and Majma' al-Zawaid. So the topic about maybe al-Ta'un, the plague, or maybe al-Shahada, or maybe we can maybe see the hadith in different places. But in Jami' al-Usul and Majma' al-Zawaid, mostly in al-Tib, the medicine or plague and al-Ta'un, and we don't see that hadith in Majma' al-Zawaid. We see it in Jami' al-Usul, and he mentioned just al-Bukhari. So other tool, if we know that just like one word in the hadith, maybe let us say al-Ta'un, there is a very important book called Al-Mu'jam al-Mufahris li Alfaz al-Hadith al-Nabawi, and under al-Ta'un, this all words ordered alphabetically. So we go to Ta Ain Nun, and under Ta Ain Nun we see At-Ta'un, and here سألت رسول الله النبي, so two wordings, Rasulullah al-Nabi عن الطاعون, and we see Kha al-Bukhari, that mean, and then mentioning here where is cited in al-Bukhari, in al-Anbiya, al-Qadar, al-Tib, and then Mim, that's Sahih Muslim, and then Musnad Ahmad. So yes, that we see it in al-Bukhari, we see it in Ahmad, but here we have a new one, Muslim. Okay, if we go back to Muslim and search on Muslim, we will not see it. There's a mistake here. Right, so after searching, we don't see it. Maybe a different hadith, but not that hadith. سألت رسول الله عن الطاعون. So still we have al-Bukhari and Musnad Ahmad. So Al-Mu'jam al-Mufaharis li Alfaz al-Hadith al-Nabawi, collecting 9 books, this 6 canonical books, and then Musnad Imam Ahmad, Muwatta Malik, and Sunan al-Darimi. Is there another book also, Miftah Kunuz al-Sunnah, this by the Deutsch Orientalist Fensing. He collecting the 9 books that mentioned the Mu'jam al-Mufaharis, 6 canonical books, and Sunan al-Darimi, Musnad Ahmad, and Muwatta Malik, and also 5 additional books, and Maghazi al-Waqidi, Tabaqat ibn Sa'ad, Musnad Zayd bin Ali, and Sirat bin Hisham, and Musnad Abi Dawud al-Tayalisi. And also this book ordered alphabetically. So I searched on this hadith and I found it under the chapter Ash-Shuhada. So you need just like to figure out where you can find the hadith, maybe under al-Tab, under Ash-Shuhada, maybe under, could be At-Ta'un. After searching, I found this under Shuhada, and then I found the word At-Ta'un, and then here At-Ta'un Shahada li Kull Muslim. This is like a very generic title, include many ahadith. Among them, the hadith that we search, like here we said Al-Bukhari, Kitab, Kaza, Bab, Kaza, Kitab, Bab, Kaza, and then Muslim. When we go to Muslim, we don't find the hadith. Sunan Ibn Majah, we find a different hadith, not the hadith we search. And this Ainda, this I think Tabaqat ibn Sa'ad, we don't find this hadith, we find another hadith, and Musnad Ahmad, we find another, we find some ahadith as mentioned in Tuhfat al-Atraf and Ithaf al-Mahra and Muwatta Malik. So far, we like all of these ahadith, all of these collections, maybe we have right now around maybe 35 or 40 collections of the hadith with around maybe, let us say, from maybe 800,000 hadith. And the hadith we can locate just like in 3 collections, in Al-Bukhari and Sunan al-Nasa'i and Musnad Ahmad. And in all of these, we can see all of these collections, 3 collections mentioned, فَيَمْكُثُ فِي بَلَدِهِ, stay in his country, except just one narration in Musnad Ahmad bin Hanbal said فَيَمْكُثُ فِي بَيْتِهِ. And we know the common link is Dawood bin Abi al-Furat, narrated through Abdullah bin Buraida, Yahya bin Ya'mar, and then Aisha. And from Dawood bin Abi al-Furat, we have 7 narrators. 6 agreed about that, فَيَمْكُثُ فِي بَلَدِهِ, and 1, Abdul Samad, said فَيَمْكُثُ فِي بَيْتِهِ. So let us just like see this graph I put on the hadith here. This is the sanad. The hadith as mentioned in Al-Bukhari عن عائشة زوج النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قالت سألت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عن الطاعون فأخبرني أنه عذاب يبعث الله على من يشاء من عباده وأن الله سبحانه جعله رحمة للمؤمنين ليس من أحد يقع الطاعون فيمكث في بلده صابرا محتسبا يعلم أنه لا يصيبه إلا ما كتب الله له إلا كان له مثل أجر شهيد. So I put here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This where I trace the difference in wordings. And I put here the collections, Al-Bukhari, we see the hadith in 3 chapters, and Nasa'i 3 places, and Ahmad in 3 places. And here we can see Dawood bin Abi al-Furat, he is a common link, Abdullah bin Buraida. After Dawood bin Abi al-Furat, we have same isnad, right? And here we have an, here we have thana, that means haddathana, and here all of them an, and here all of them an, but some of them Aisha akhbarathu. That means an Aisha akhbarathu. That means Aisha informed him or told him. Aisha akhbarathu. Some of them without Aisha. And from Dawood Abi Furat, we can see the first one here, Musa bin Ismail, Hibban bin Hilal, An-Nadr bin Shumail, Yunus bin Muhammad, Abu Abdurrahman al-Muqri, and Abdul Samad. Abdul Samad in the red line, because we can see here in the difference of wording. So ليس من أحد, we can see we have different wording here. ليس من عبد, ما من عبد, ليس من عبد, ليس من عبد, ليس من عبد. The second one, يقع الطاعون, we can see here ما من عبد يكون في بلدة يكون فيه. There is no mention for طاعون. And here يقع في الطاعون, not يقع الطاعون. يقع full noun in طاعون, and يقع في الطاعون, and يقع الطاعون فيه. And then وقع الطاعون في بلده. Right? So all of these could be a very important indications for maybe a later discussion. Maybe, let us say, after maybe a few years, something like happened related to one of maybe a question related to maybe we are not aware right now. But later, this could be a very important thing for maybe a later discussion. So, فيمكث في بلده, this is a very important in our case. You can see here, ثلاثة, number 3, يمكث فيه ولا يخرج من البلدة. Here, everything بلده, but 3 here, بيته, instead of بلده, and narrated through Abdul Samad. Right? And then shaheed here, sometimes a shaheed, not just like indefinite, is definite. So this is like a very important, right now we have very important facts. This hadith is ahad through Dawood and Furat, Aisha, and after Dawood and Furat, we have like multiple narrators. Abdul Samad disagree with others, and that in Musnad Ahmad. So now we know that in Islam Online, the hadith narrated يمكث في بيتي. If anyone like go to Google, find that, and then go and giving like khutbah Jum'ah, okay, and say to people, no, you need to go to stay in your house because it's the recommendation of the Prophet, and because of that you can be a martyr. So this, yes, I see it, and maybe I see a long article on Google, but is that correct, not correct, and what's going on? So then we can see here is really, it's completely different. So this, so far, it's not the end, because we need like, okay, because at-ta'un itself is a topic maybe occupied many treatises or maybe a monograph in the history of Islam. We know that Ibn Hajar himself penned a very important book called بذل الطاعون في فضل الطاعون. بذل الماعون في فضل الطاعون. And luckily, I've heard like a few days ago, this book would be in English, maybe inshallah in this year, maybe later in this year, or maybe next year. So بذل الماعون and is a very important book to give us a very holistic approach on this issue of ta'un in the history of Islam and on the Hadith. If we go to this book بذل الماعون, let us see what we have here in بذل الماعون. This بذل الماعون in page 199, he mentions the Hadith ذكروا ما يشترط لتحصيل الشهادة بالطاعون, and he narrated the Abdul Samad, the one that في بيته. Do you see here? فيمكث في بيته, right? And then he said أخرجه البخاري والنسائي من حديث داود and Furat. So giving us the same fact that Dawood and Furat is the common link. وقال البخاري في روايته فيمكث في بلده. Right? So then Ibn Hajar is aware of that, but in his time, it's not an issue. So maybe that's why maybe he did not reflect on it and just like not giving any details, but it's an issue in our modern time. So this like there is a difference between balad and baytihi. So now we have a book, so we can maybe see the issue of ta'un and all the hadith in one places, and then we can understand this hadith, the connection between shahada and between ta'un, between plague, and between staying in your place, right? So we have 3 dimensions here. And then how we can approach this hadith. Is this hadith, the grading of this hadith, since it's mentioned in Bukhari, that it's hadith sahih or not sahih, or in Nasai. So based on traditional rankings, this hadith should be sahih because mentioned in Bukhari and also in Nasai. But then in Musnad Imam Ahmad, out of the 6 canonical books, since he mentioned فَيَمْكُسُ فِي بَيْتِهِ, we know this like is there is a defect here. This riwayah is contradict with other, and we cannot rely on this riwayah. But then we need to approach the hadith narrated in Al-Bukhari and through Dawood bin Abi al-Furat there, because there is an issue that Dawood bin Abi al-Furat is hadith ahad through Dawood bin Abi al-Furat till Aisha. So what's happening here? Why is this hadith not narrated maybe from another Sahaba, or maybe not just like other tabi'in, not Yahya bin Ya'mar? And why just like Yahya bin Ya'mar? Why Dawood bin Abi al-Furat? And why Abdullah bin Burayda? So there is a question here. And then the hadith itself, the matan here, also talking about something like very important. So the connection between shahada and al-muks fil bayt. So like staying in house and the reward of martyr. So what happened if someone died in his house, but not because of a plague? And is this considered shaheed or not shaheed? So the wording of hadith said, yes, he is shaheed. And so then how we can understand that? So I think here we need to go back and read all the collections like Jami' al-Usul and Majma' al-Zawaid and Bazl al-Ma'un to see is that there's a connection between this reward of Shahada and Ta'un, and what's the connection between that? So in Jami' al-Usul we can see like very important hadith related to al-ard, the homeland, not al-bayt. And the homeland and the issue of ta'un, the issue of plague, and then the reward of martyrs. And I think the hadith itself has like a sense and foundations, and many hadith support the idea we witness here. So however, so far we can see like this approach help us in finding the hadith. And but not yet. We know that in our modern academia, there are many people like working in narrow, maybe focusing something like maybe on some narrators, on some words. And I just like when I'm searching this hadith, I found a very important, paper called لطائف الإشارات في تعليل أحاديث داود bin Abi al-Furat. So this paper just like working on Dawood bin Abi al-Furat himself. So and then this written by Dr. Khalid al-Hayek, and this a very amazing work, just like tracing Dawood bin Abi al-Furat and then his narrations in the collections of hadith. And he found a very important things I did not find in all of these collections. So he said that this hadith narrated in Musnad Ishaq bin Rahoya and also Sunan al-Bayhaqi. And when I went to Musnad Ishaq bin Rahoya, yes, I found that because if we go back to, we know that from this Al-Bukhari narrated through Ishaq bin Rahoya, right? And we know that in the second Islamic century, that Ishaq bin Rahoya has a musnad, and this musnad edited and published. And then it seemed like it's very, I think it would be good if we look and search for this hadith in Ishaq bin Rahoya. So this is what we have in Al-Bukhari. When we go to Ishaq bin Rahoya, so this expanding the chart here, this Musnad Ishaq bin Rahoya, and we found the hadith. And under another bin Shumail, and then same. So we have na, so you see here na, sana, an, nothing different, same as we have in Bukhari. And here I think it would be a very important evidence based on Motzki and Siskin for us, Siskin work, like called this approach called source reconstruction. So then, yes, we can see that since Ishaq bin Rahoya Musnad is published and manuscript, that mean it's clearly there's an evidence that Ishaq bin Rahoya narrated that through another bin Shumail. So now we know that the oldest narrator is another bin Shumayl, right? Because we found it in Ishaq bin Rahoya. And this based on dating of the hadith and isnad. And in Musnad Ishaq bin Rahoya, we can see same observation as we notice in Sahih al-Bukhari, this 1, 2, 3. So nothing different from al-Bukhari, okay, from Musnad Ishaq bin Rahoya. And also al-Hayek in his paper on Lataif al-Isharat, he also put al-Bayhaqi. And also Ishaq bin Rahoya, so Ishaq bin Rahoya we find in 2 places. And also through Abu Abdul Rahman, you see Sana, An, and 6. But here we have different words. In Ishaq bin Rahoya, different words from Musnad Ahmad bin Hanbal. So here we have a different method. ليس من عبد يكون في بلدة الطاعون فمكث في بلده. And here we have an additional thing from Ishaq bin Rahoya. You read تلك البلدة. So this is like a very important addition from Ishaq bin Rahoya. You read تلك البلدة. That means the same place that he is residing in, not another place. So however, this like different wordings from Ahmad Hanbal, and also we see it in Al-Bayhaqi based on the paper of Al-Hayek and through Abdul Rahman bin Mahdi. So now we have additional narrators that would not be for us. So now we have 8 narrators. But Abdul Rahman bin Mahdi فيقيم ببلده. So now we have 7 narrators said فيمكث في بلده, and Abdul Samad said فيمكث في بيته. We know that based on the genre of ilal, defects in hadith, that Abdul Samad is hadith shadh, anomalous, and cannot be considered an evidence, since there is a difference and maybe disagreement, or maybe he disagree the majority who narrated through Dawood bin Abi Furat. And then we have another issue, the hadith ahad here, right? Because we know that Yahya bin Ya'mar here, there's an issue about Yahya bin Ya'mar. Some people said he did not meet Aisha, and he was kathir al-irsal. He just like giving a statement through Prophet without Sahaba. So then, but he is narrated in al-Bukhari. So then traditionally said this hadith sahih. Maybe in Western academia, they raise some questions on this isnad from Dawood bin Abi Furat. So maybe Motsky will say this, yes, we know that exactly that another bin Shumayl narrated that to Ishaq bin Rahoya, and then Dawood bin Furat here maybe the one who originating this hadith based on Western academia, based on like Muslim scholarship. This hadith, there's no any problem, even though there's a had, because all of these narrators are trustworthy, and that's why we can rely on that hadith. I know this, and the answer is very long, but I think can help a lot how we can navigate hadith, and maybe the audience can take this the presentation and the answer for the last question in different ways. Just let me know if you have any question, any comment on that.
So thank you so much, Doctor, for that incredibly thorough answer. And so I wanted to move on and ask a little bit about the narrators. Sometimes you have a narrator, perhaps you don't have a full name, perhaps you have a name that isn't, commonly used. How do we locate these narrators so that we can have a general idea about whether or not they did in fact narrate from someone else, when they died, political leanings, maybe when they were born, from whom they narrated, and who narrated from them. So questions like this, what are some useful guides, in texts, stuff like this that could help us out?
Right, so for narrators, we have same as we have for the content of the hadith or finding the hadith. We have like narrators of 6 collections, hadith books, and maybe more than 6 canonical hadith books. But however, let us work here, since we find this hadith in the 6 canonical books and also in Musnad Imam Ahmad. So there is an evolution for the genre on narrators in 6 canonical books. Start with Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi in his kitab Tahdhib al-Kamal. he cited in this book all narrators mentioned in 6 canonical books, that mean Ibn Majah, not Muwatta Malik. And on Tahdhib al-Kamal, that I'm sorry, not Tahdhib al-Kamal, the book by Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi is al-Kamal, and Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi died 600 Hijri. And then on his book, Al-Mizzi came and just like refined his book by a title called Tahdhib al-Kamal. He added, he changed, he modified, but he worked on the narrators of 6 canonical books. And after Al-Mizzi, Al-Dhahabi came and penned 2 books on Tahdhib al-Kamal. The first one, Tadhhib al-Tahdhib, and the second one, Al-Kashif. Tadhhib al-Tahdhib is like expanded Tahdhib al-Kamal, and he added more. But in Al-Kashif, he summarized the statement and description in Kitab Tahdhib al-Kamal of Al-Mizzi. And then after Al-Dhahabi, Ibn Hajar found that Al-Dhahabi, in his 2 books, Tadhhib al-Tahdhib and Al-Kashif, he he does not give a sense, because in Tadhhib al-Tahdhib, he just like giving a longer description, and Al-Kashif giving a very brief description. So then Ibn Hajar provided us with 2 books, same as Al-Dhahabi. One is long and one is small. The long one is Tahdhib al-Tahdhib, giving a description on the narrator, and Taqrib al-Tahdhib is a very brief one. So just working on Dawood bin Abi al-Furat, since he is a common link here, if we just like giving some practical a practical exercise. Okay, so do you see my screen, Al-Kamal here?
Yeah.
Okay, so this Al-Kamal fi Asma al-Rijal by Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi is the first book, opens the genre, collecting the narrators of 6 canonical books and giving some details. So this based on alphabetical orders, we can see Dawood bin Abi al-Furat under the letter Dal and giving the whole name, Dawood bin Amr bin Abi al-Furat al-Kindi, Abu Amr al-Marwazi, so from where, and Qadim al-Basra, his trips, and Rawahan narrated through, and these student narrated through him, and mentioning all of them. We can see here is not a holistic list, is not a complete list. We just like here see Ibn Burayda, yes, but here Rawa anhu Musa bin Ismail, but we know that from Hadith that we are searching for, there are 8 narrators, just like Musa bin Ismail here mentioned, and giving some maybe grading or some description, قال بن يحيى بن معين هو ثقة. And then where we can find this hadith, Bukhari, Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, Ibn Majah, Abu Dawud. So Muslim did not narrate anything through Abu Dawud. So this Al-Kamal, Tahdhib al-Kamal by Al-Mizzi. So we can see he mentioned Kha, Ta, Sin, Qaf, right? This is Bukhari, Tirmidhi, and Nasa'i, and Ibn Majah. And he did not mention Abu Dawud. So Abu Dawud here, but he did not mention Abu Dawud. So we need to examine this. So why not Abu Dawud here? اسمه عمر بن الفرات الكندي أبو عمرو المروزي قدم البصرة. And then we can see in this edition many resources on Dawood bin Abi al-Furat if anyone wants to expand his search. روى عن, this is his shuyukh, and روى عنه, we can see here different, not just like one, Abdul Rahman bin Mahdi, Abdul Samad, and Hibban. And Kamal just mentioned Musa bin Ismail, and here we have 3 other narrators. And also Musa bin Ismail, another bin Ismail. We can see is like mostly a complete list. And then we can see like not just like Yahya bin Ma'in, and he mentioned Abu Dawud, Osman bin Sa'id, and Thiqa. He added. So then Al-Mizzi, really it's a very important work on Al-Kamal لعبد الغني المقدسي, and ذكره ابن حبان في كتاب الثقات. And then قال أبو بكر بن أبي عاصم مات سنة 67 و100, giving details on his death. روى له البخاري الترمذي والنسائي وابن ماجه, did not mention Abu Dawud. So we can see like more information. If we go to Al-Zahabi, تذهيب التهذيب, this is a long version. He put Kha, Ti, Ta, Sin, Qaf. He did not put Abu Dawud, giving the name Rawa anhu, we say Abd al-Rahman bin Mahdi, and wasaqahu bin Ma'in Abu Dawud. Nothing added to Al-Mizzi, and it seems like Al-Mizzi is more useful than Tadhib al-Tahdhib. If we go to Al-Kashif al-Zahabi, this is a very brief, you see 2 lines here. Dawood bin Abi al-Furat al-Kindi al-Marwazi an Ibn Burayda, just like mentioned one, وعلباء وعنه ibn Mahdi وعفان, 2 narrators. So it's not helpful if someone wants like a description. Thiqa, giving like, we don't know who he said Thiqa, Tufiya, and who narrated and who mentioned him in the collection. Now this like for Al-Zahabi, if we go to Tahdhib al-Tahdhib of Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, this like similar as Tahdhib al-Tahdhib li al-Zahabi. So he did not mention Abu Dawud, and he put Qadim al-Basra, his trip, Rawa'an. You can see not a full list because he said وَغَيْرُهُمْ and others. وَعَنْهُ, he mentioned many, and وَجَمَاعَ, and a group. And قال ابن معين وأبو داود ثقة, ذكره ابن حبان في الثقات, قال ابن أبي الأعصام. So here's the addition from Ibn Hajar. قلت, this is قلت, this is something like we witness in Kitab Tahdhib al-Tahdhib. When he say قلت, this is like additional observation from Ibn Hajar. وذكر أبو الوليد الباجي في رجال البخاري عن ابن المبارك أنه وثقه. This additional, we don't see it in previous books. وقال العجلي ثقة, وقال الدارقطني ليس به بأس. If we go to تقريب التهذيب of Ibn Hajar, this is similar as Al-Kashif, is very brief. He mentioned everyone except Abu Dawud, Dawud bin Abi al-Furat, and then ثقة من الثامنة. Just, he did not put anything about his shuyukh and his students, and he put just like a brief grading, ثقة, based on his examination. And من الثامنة, just like this, الطبقة الثامنة is just like the 8th generation. So Ibn Hajar in this book divided all narrators in 12 generations, like from Sahaba to Tabi'een, and each generation there are sub-generations. So then Abu Dawud and Abu Furat is the generation 8 is like Ibn Uyayna. Like Ibn Uyayna. So, however, this like the collections on like on narrators, just like focusing on 6 canonical books. There are some collections focusing on more than 6 canonical books, like by Al-Husayni. We witnessed that in let us see, Abu Abdullah Muhammad bin Ali al-Husayni al-Dimashqi died 765. He added 4 books to these 6 canonical books, and that's very beneficial, useful, and good work, because he added the collections of the 4 A'imma, Musnad Ahmad and Muwatta Malik and Musnad Shafi'i and Musnad Abu Hanifa, to 6 canonical books. So in that book, we can see the narrators of Muhaddithin and the narrators of Fuqaha. And also Ibn Hajar penned a very important book, تعجيل المنفعة بزوائد رجال الأئمة الأربعة. He added all narrators cited in the kutub of 4 A'imma, Al-Imam Ahmad, Malik, Al-Shafi'i, and Abu Hanifa, and also other books narrated later in their circles, like Ma'rifat al-Sunan wal-Athar lil-Bayhaqi, that's Shafi'i, and then Gharaib Malik, that's Maliki, and then Az-Zuhd li Ahmad, that's Hanbali, and also Al-Athar li Al-Shaybani. And there are other books like just like focusing on reliable narrators, or just like weak narrators, Kutub al-Thiqat or Kutub al-Du'afa, or maybe some books just like focusing on narrators from specific region like Tariq Asbahan, Tariq Baghdad. And that's all for narrators. So if we want to know like about political inclination and all of these issues, mostly we need to read beyond that these books, maybe in some, especially if someone mentioned like he has Mu'tazilite inclination, we need to read that beyond that. So this like based on cases, but that's just like a generic outline of your question.
Again, thank you so very much. So just two quick questions, actually. And this is kind of moving away from what we've been talking about, but what are some general guidelines you could tell us about when it comes to buying or using texts in Hadith? Who are good editors, good publishers? Any thoughts on this?
Right. I think the best way, since like we cannot do that by ourselves, me too, like I sometimes am confused like which edition I want to buy, but I follow this like general guideline. I prefer the oldest version of all books, like this coming like from Indian subcontinent, or the Egyptian Isa Bab al-Halabi, or this the oldest edition. This mostly like edition with very maybe little mistakes and mostly correct. But however, we know all of these. It's very hard when you read. It's the writing is very small, and there's no comments and no comparison. So it's in terms of accuracy and precision. So they are very good. And I think that's very important to have them at least as a PDF, or just like to refer to them when you compare. So, however, we know that there are a very like high competition among publishers right now on like finding, or maybe the older manuscript for each book, like a manuscript written by the author himself or by his students. So this like received a highest level of reception among buyers. So like talking about Sahih al-Bukhari, there are multiple editions, maybe tens or maybe hundreds. So then how we can know the best one? So yes, and we know there are some maybe books written on the edition of Sahih al-Bukhari. So I think it would be very important to know the history of the editions, and then to ask someone who is specialized. Maybe it would be good to ask someone who is specialized. This is a different area. It's not just like to rely on your knowledge. So for Sahih al-Bukhari specifically, or for the 6 canonical books, I prefer everything coming from Dar al-Bushra. This is my personal preference. This in Karachi, and their editions, I read through these editions. I encounter with like there are many, not many mistakes, very, very few mistakes, and or typos. And in comparison with others, Dar al-Bushra, it seems like very good in terms of 6 canonical books and all things related to Hadith works. And the second level, or the second ranking I give to Dar al-Ta'sil, is not new, but working on also the Kutub al-Hadith, Kutub al-Ilal, al-Su'alat, al-Rijal. So everything also coming from Dar al-Ta'sil is, I think, a high level of quality. The third rank, maybe Dar al-Minhaj, also they have very good work. And we know that, especially when you speak about a very specific collection like Sahih al-Bukhari, there is maybe there is a website called Bukharipedia. You see my screen, right?
Yeah, I see your screen.
Yeah, so Bukharipedia is a very important resource on Sahih al-Bukhari itself. And if we go to Sahih here, I'm sorry, there is this something like you witness. Okay, now, okay, so let me do that. So when we go to Sahih, let us say Kitab al-Iman here, and Bab Qawl al-Nabi Buni al-Islam ala khams. So do you see this? There's a hadith here, and there is manuscripts, and this is a very important resource. So providing different manuscripts for Sahih, and we go like في مخطوطات Sahih, you can see here different. This al-Yuniniya, from اليونانية, if you go to like الطبعة السلطانية, right? You read from الطبعة السلطانية, or read from أبي ذر recension, or you can read from أبي الوقت recension, or you can read from Al-Kashani recension. And then with shuruh, commentaries, and on ruwat, narrators, and the gharib, linguistic meanings, and mu'allaqat, this ta'liqat in Sahih al-Bukhari. And this is a very important resource in Sahih al-Bukhari. And al-Maktaba itself is very useful. You can see all works on Sahih al-Bukhari, al-Matan, al-Mustakhrajat, al-Muntakhabat, the selections from Sahih al-Bukhari, al-Mukhtasarat, and then Jama' Bayn al-Sahih, a collection between Bukhari and Muslim, Shuruh, al-commentaries, and then you can see al-Gharib, al-Mushkil, and al-Akhtam, al-Rijal. So this is a very important resource, and this in progress. So they adding many resources, and they work on many scripts. And when they put any book here, they put their version. It's not like coming from a PDF. Like you will not see it in Google. So that's the editions of the site themselves. They work again on all of these books, and they provide their editions based on the oldest manuscripts. So then Bukharipedia is considered the most important resource on Sahih al-Bukhari in our modern time. It's a very specific, and I hope this could be like a base for other 6 canonical books. So many commentaries added here. So I worked later with this group here on adding the comments of Al-Jumhuri, Sheikh Yunus Al-Jumhuri. We say Al-Jumhuri in Arabic. So inshallah will be added later on his Fath al-Bari.
Thank you so much. And just as we conclude this this segment, I wanted to ask, how would we cite a hadith in a research paper?
Yeah, as I said, if you cite this hadith like first time, you need to give full details, the name of the author names, and then the collection, the book, the editor, the number of volumes, publishers, the number of the volume, and then the page of in that volume. Or you can mention in the end, instead of the volume and page, you can just like the number of the hadith. So it's very important for this citation is to make it clear for anyone reading is to find that hadith in the book. So the publisher and the editor and all of these are very important. Citing the number of the hadith or volume and number, I think this I find too in different places. So, but however, citing hadith, we know that there are different versions, different editions for each book. So again, it's very important to clarify and highlight the publisher and the edition.
Excellent. Oh, I was going to ask if you had any preference with like mentioning the kitab and the bab, so that way perhaps maybe easier reference.
Yeah. So there's no need for mentioning kitab and bab, unless there is like a benefit or maybe something like can relate to your paper when you mention that.
Understood. Thank you. Doctor, thank you so much for giving us so much of your time for this comprehensive and very, very useful episode. Before I conclude, I wanted to ask if you were working on any projects that you wanted to tell the audience about, anything in the pipeline.
Yeah, so just I worked on a paper, inshallah, will be published very soon on the approach of Mu'tazilite on hadith criticism in the first 4 centuries. This is something like I work on the early centuries and the standards followed by 3 schools, that's Hanafi school, Mu'tazilite schools, and also Ahl al-Hadith. And specifically on the non-isnad tool. And this helped me in a very wide project on the question of epistemology in the history of Islam, in the early history of Islam and Hadith criticism. So I work on the epistemology, and what I mean by epistemology, there is a sub genre in epistemology called the Epistemology of Testimony. So this was the standard required for narrators and for someone who is speaker and also for the one who is hearer. So there are many papers written in the last 2 decades on that. And so the main question for these papers on the justifications of knowledge. So how we can justify our knowledge, and do we need testimonial evidences or non-testimonial evidences? And is testimony considered a valid resource for our knowledge, or we need to work or maybe to rely on other non-testimonial evidence like inference or maybe sense or reasoning? So is this something I'm interested in to work on the epistemology of testimony and the 3 main schools in the early history of Islam.
So again, thank you so much, Dr. Eido, for your generosity, your knowledge, and your time. And with that, I'd like to conclude the episode.